Let's have a nice applause for Ken Winokur and Terry Donahue. And Roger Miller, who is back in the East Lobby.
Waiting to sell you things.
Waiting to sell you things. And joining us on stage for the Q&A, the moderator will be Richard Newport, who you met just before. And where would you like them to sit? Also, we have Michael Phillips. And Professor Todd Rindleman from Seattle.
Well, thanks again. It's a stunning show. It's really, really fun and beautiful. So I hope it is, yeah, I assume it is for you guys to play as well.
It's a really happy ending. You know, the last 10 seconds are just like, you know, it's all okay.
It is actually very uplifting at the end for a German expressionist film, right? It's got
for about
if there's redemption, they throw in 3 seconds of it. That's true. So do you want to? We should get started with. We'll talk a lot about the film and the background and have other questions. So do you want to explain a little more, like how it came to be that you got access to this, and you made it sound like you wanted to do this before or had hoped in the past.
We were driving in our van, who knows where, and pick up the phone, and it's Tom Luddy of the Telluride Film Festival, and Tom says, "We got a film for you. How does Variety sound?" And so I'd been reading about Variety. Everybody talks about it, but it has not been available, not in DVD or video, not even a VHS copy. And I just kind of hit the roof and said, "Absolutely, we want that one." I guess I ought to see it, but...
Well, is there a routine way that you normally choose films or films come to you? Is this really rare that somebody says, "Would you like to do a following thing?" Or how do you guys usually come up with what you're doing?
It's actually a very common thing. We work a lot with the Telluride Film Festival. They suggest films. Occasionally we say that one's not for us, but you know, they're pretty astute and they generally know what we need. And then sometimes we have a hole in our schedule that needs to be filled, and I have a long list of films that can fill that need. So.
And we've also worked for a long time with the recently departed David Shepard and Serge Bromberg from Lobster Films, and Paolo Kerkiusai, the film curator at the George Eastman House, who's one of the curators also of the Pordenone Silent Film Festival. So at this point, we've made a lot of friends over the years, including Barry Allen, who was very helpful with us getting another Emil Jannings print that we did here a few years ago, The Last Command, as well as Underworld. So we thank him for that.
And Jannings was the first actor to win the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Last Command, and a film that is sadly lost now, The Way of All Flesh, which is just a reminder of how damn fragile our film history is. We should point out, too, that Variety was a hit in America, but they did not see this version because depending on the state and the city censors, as much as the first 2 reels were just cut out because they did not want, they would not allow an adulterous situation at the center of the story. In other words, when you see the beginning of the censored cut, here's my wife, there was no other woman. She was just the woman. And I don't know how that would have even played out.
No, it doesn't quite make sense. And apparently there were several American release prints, but but you're right. It wasn't just that they cut out sort of some of the nudity of the performance and then cut to those funny eyes or the binoculars with the wonderful composite shots. They got away from some of the nudity that way. But yeah, there are a number of different ways that it would have been released, unfortunately. But you're right. The main point that it also is how much of silent cinema has been lost, and that's just really tragic. It is a really good point. But yeah, there are many, many prints. The notion of a director's cut and stuff, I guess. There were many different cuts at the time. And
every time I look at this, I notice that when they're on the trapeze, the first time they unfurl a thing, it's in English, and the next time you see the same film or the same scene, it's in German. So you assume they've put together a couple of prints to make this version.
That's true. But so when you do, there will be a DVD release, we're assuming?
Not ours. There is a Blu-ray release.
But you won't be able to release this with your...
Nope. This one's, well
I
Did
wrapped up.
anybody pirate it? Just sell it. Just sell it.
I have the other one. It's not very...
That's
anyway.
a huge-
Okay, no, this is heartbreaking, but anyway. Well, we need a more upbeat
Just
thing.
another
Yeah,
heartbreaking moment of our
I would
score.
just say that's a huge loss. The DVD copy at Scarecrow Video in Seattle is of the neutered version that doesn't involve the affair at the beginning of it, and the soundtrack is really inappropriate that is on that. So I'm sad that we won't get to take home your...
The good news is there was a track that was recorded by an American band called Tiger Lilies that showed in Germany just last year, and that's on the first release of this in Germany, and everybody just hated it. So they went out and they actually got a number of our good friends to do scores. So the Berkeley student silent film composition class run by Sheldon Mirowitz has a score on the new Kino release, and our friend Stephen Horn, a keyboard player from Britain, has got another track on there. So it's pretty well represented. So.
It strikes me that this would be an ideal project for you guys because you have the sort of the irresistible setting of the circus melodrama, but there's an awful lot of this film that is just burrowing into the psyches of this torment. So it's a very private interior, the more expression. I mean, half the time you look like it's like you're looking at an Otto Dix painting from the time come to life.
And strangely, that's when we're at our happiest, when things are going the most wrong. And then the circus stuff is just fun and kind of warped. But yeah, we really...
So when they're static, I mean, when they're just sort of looking like they're seething internally, but they just sort of shiver, and maybe his eye goes a little half closed. Would you want to say more about what do you compose? How is that exciting and fun to do? It seems like the most challenging.
Well, no, I mean, because that's just so dark, and I don't know, it's just easy to get into those scenes. The active scenes, needless to say, are easy to get into, but the ones that are just really dark and sinister, it's just, I don't know, it's just natural for us, and we don't even have to talk about it. We just start recording. It's like, okay, we know what we're doing there. Where we have trouble is the scenes that we call the picnic scenes, where there's nothing going on, and it's could be thought of as filler. There's actually, in one of our films, there's actually a big long picnic scene in He Who Gets Slapped, and we're like, God, why are we doing this? I wish we could just make it go away. And so those are the ones that we have the most trouble with, where they're completely neutral, and it's just in between the good stuff. But
What is your process like in the final confrontation between the two men? Like, we're missing a lot of the dialogue, of the conversation that's going on between them. And so your role is to sort of step in and collaborate with the nonverbal performances of the actors. What is that like? Because that scene is so dramatic.
that's another one that just seems natural. It's like all the tense scenes are really pretty natural, and now it's just a matter of that one goes on for a good amount of time, so now how do you really go with it? And we added that really strange rhythm that's an interesting time signature, and we put that in a couple times. And it starts with the scene we call Wobble Drunk, where he walks in, and that's also kind of fun to play the drunk scenes. Sort of naturals at that. And so that takes a little while to develop because it's a really important scene, but it's still all very instinctual to us. And I think the fact that we compose collaboratively, I think really helps our process in that we're just like reacting to what we see, sort of translating what we see into what you hear.
Talk a little bit about how the music sort of complements some of the more kinetic sequences without falling into, and I'm sure this is on your mind, how do we avoid circus cliche or acrobatic cliche? This is from the 1926 review in the Chicago Daily Tribune. Thrilling mob scenes and poignant personal bits that get you where you live. And such camera work as I think you have never seen before. The breath catches in your throat, your palms are cold and wet, your scalp prickles, it's like menopause, and a chill, damp, mausoleum-like breeze seems to be blowing through you as heart just about stopped, You go hurtling through the air. I mean, it was like, I think it honestly hit people, those sequences, like 3D or even VR at the time. That's the strength of Karl Freund's cinematography, and the fact that he went on to be a bigger force in Hollywood than the director, DuPont, is bittersweet but understandable, I think. How do you accompany that without Mickey Mousing the action?
Well, we started on the circus scenes, and we've done a couple of circus films already. So in a sense, we kind of knew where to go with it. But the first pass through, we said, well, it's the right attitude, but it's a cliche of a circus theme. And so we said, okay, well, get the rhythm was proper, the feel was proper. Let's, just meld the melodic thing a little bit more and try to come up with a slightly more interesting, less obvious.
Warp it a little.
Warp it, yeah. All we have to do is let the blackness of our hearts come out onto our music. So.
But also, I'm just wondering from this film and others, when you have diegetic music, that is, when you have somebody inside. So at one point when Bertha Marie does her funny little dance in the tent there, and the wife is playing around bump, 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 bump on a piano, do you ignore it? Because then there's also that moment when she stops playing. And so I'm just wondering if you care about the music prompts in the film at all, or do you have to just kind of avoid them?
That depends on the film. I mean, there's some times where, it's just a piano playing. The Last Command, for example, near the end of that, they cue the music and they show a piano player. And they tell us exactly what song to play. Play the Russian national anthem. It's like, okay, which one are we going to find, and which one are we going to play? And we try to kind of match up with the hands, at least at the beginning, and then we let it go. There's other scenes in films like last year's In You Men, where there's suddenly a jazz band. It's like, well, we really don't sound like that, and we really don't want to sound like that. So we try to hint at the attitude without trying to copy that what you're seeing.
Although typically when we see something on the screen, we will usually we start doing what is obviously going on the screen, and then we'll deviate from it if we find it doesn't work. If we hit a brick wall, we have very little patience for that. If we do something that doesn't work, we just go, that's bad. Let's try something else. And we'll just flail around until something comes up.
Sure. Just one last thing I want to mention that you found that great review. There was also, when it premiered in the United States, there were many different articles where DuPont would go from town to town. He actually went to New York. He'd go to Chicago. He did sort of a tour, and he said, everybody asks me about the camera tricks and all that, and I have to assure them there really were people up there on the trapeze and stuff like that. But he also said a couple things. One, he said he really wanted to reinforce the sort of bestial, just sort of primitive emotions of all of these characters, especially Boss Huller and Bertha Marie. He said, I want them to look like monkeys when they climb up those ladders. So he spends a lot of time making sure we see them go up and to go down, but he wants them to look like monkeys. He wants this primitive stuff to come out as well. But he also said she was an amazing actress, and that she was game for anything, and that when she threw herself down those stairs, he said she was just completely bruised by the fine. So it was a very physical kind of performance, not only the dangerous stuff. They had other stunt people doing most of the trapeze work, but still they were really up at the Winter Garden platforms, close to those cameras, fixed in the ceiling. They're throwing themselves down the stairs. And also just, it's an exhausting, the expressionist acting is really an exhausting experience. See how she was like, when she realizes, oh my God, he knows what's going on near the end of the film, she stands at this angle. He's already stood at an angle like that. So apparently it was just also just a physically exhausting kind of performances that they gave. So, but yeah, we can, and then we'll open up for questions.
Along with that, because the film is famous for its sensuality and the primal qualities that you just described, and yet there's these really fascinating sort of spiritual bookends to the film where we first see him with the warden, whose sort of hands are in a meditative position, and there's a crucifix behind him. The whole film sort of plays out as a type of confession, sort of between priest and supplicant. And then with the ending, he's so powerfully lit after he's sort of gotten this off of his chest, and we know that his family's been praying for him, and they assert that God's mercy is greater than
Door opening, yeah.
his actions. And then there's this almost I don't think it's just because Easter was recently that there is this resurrection feel with those doors opening. I think
And the
that's
chair
fascinating.
that the warden is sitting in has a big heart cut in it.
Right, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So there's this notion of a little redemption. There is some kind of spirit, which is not the sort of thing that normally you'll
think
find
it
in a
would come
German
along.
expressionist film. There's no hope usually.
Yeah.
So, except madness. So yeah, I think you're right. I think, and that might be also one thing that made it very popular in the United States compared to some of the other German expressionist stuff.
We should mention one thing. One of the tragic losses, along with the Way of All Flesh, is Murnau's film Four Devils, which was shot in 1928, I believe, or 29. 28, just as sound was starting to come in, and I suspect that was Murnau trying to take some of the, build on the popular success of this picture, and reportedly, the camera work in that is even more dizzyingly inspired, and we'll never know, unfortunately. But I know what you mean about that style, though. When you see Emil Jannings see that caricature on the table, I could swear the film turned color, because he looks like Shakespeare's green-eyed monster, right, with the jealousy, and it's.
Well, you were speaking yesterday at one of the panels about close-ups, and one of your favorite uses of close-up is like just to watch a face as someone comes to a realization or changes their mind or something like that. And this film's got a number of those sort of pivotal, like, not only when she walks in, oh my God, his life's going to change, or the temptation scenes, but then yes, I'm going to kill him. What am I going to do, etc. So yeah,
His eyes are the best character in the film, and a lot of my cues, in fact, are
really?
just
So you watch the
Emily
eyes
Yanning's eyes, because he just glares. And I started looking at the camera work, and if you look at some of them, they've lit it in such a way that his eyes seem almost illuminated, like there's almost light coming out of them. There's so many astounding little details in this movie. Even watching it for a millionth time, I'm noticing these amazing little details, like all the boutonnieres that they're all wearing, which are indicative of war heroes and whatever.
That's
And Yanning's character has one, but Artinelli does not, because he's not
True.
really a heroic
He's this
character. So,
foreigner and Italian coming through Italy, or coming through England, no, that's very true. And then you got the exotic Bertha Marie with her, like, what's she supposed to be from, like the Kate, what are those patterns? I mean, has she just been around the world kind of person? But yeah, so she's just this exotic object that comes out of nowhere. Anyway, we'd love to open up to questions. Anything about visual style, music?
Right here in the middle, if we get a
Do we have people? I don't see any mic people. Oh, here we go. I don't know if they're ready.
well, they're doing that.
But
One of my other favorite little details in this is when they were up on the trapeze after the big triple somersault or whatever, there's a woman in the audience clapping. She's got big lipstick, and she looks very ecstatic, and she glances over it at apparently her older husband who's fallen asleep, and then back to her, and it's like, we do not need this, but it so enriches the film. It doesn't tell anything about the story.
And she seems like almost sexually charged, right? There's something like, oh, she's just, and she looks at almost guilty of the husband who's like, oh, that figures, that he's not getting charged up like she is. Those great shots of the audience are kind of Eisenstein-like too, of just montage. Anyway.
Question in center here.
Yeah, in the two sequences in which there's a seduction going on, you chose what sounded to me like a theremin for your music. Was that really a theremin, and why did you choose that kind of sound?
That is not a theremin. That is a musical saw played with a violin bow. And that sound is both romantic and disturbing at the same time. And it can be really, it can turn at a moment's notice and become very unpleasant. But on the other hand, it can be beautiful. Maybe not the way I play it, but it can be beautiful, and it's evocative. Evokes a woman singing, and so that's why we use that piece there.
And for not repetitive, but for parallel scenes like that, so then seduction scenes, you have to be aware, you want to use, I assume, the same kind of themes several times, but not just be repetitive. Same thing with, both times they perform, the cinematographers didn't want both circus, trapeze, big scenes to look identical with the same camera, so they use different cameras for each one and a little bit to vary it. Do you vary those scenes as well a bit, or?
We do. We try to repeat themes, but we try to make them different every time. So even the early dancing scenes, we sort of leaned towards the girl being Hungarian. So we sort of leaned in that direction. And each time, there's 2 different times that comes along, and they're a little bit different each time. And so each circus thing we tried to make a little bit different. And then the trapeze thing we tried to make different in between, or each time that they come up. And it allows us to, the film allows us to, because there's the different things that happen within that scene where he's really going dizzy, that's all within there, and then it comes back when they're all back in it. So, structurally and tonally, and sometimes we'll try to use different instrumentation for different melodies at different times. So we're bringing a theme back, but with a different instrument.
Perfect. So that,
Yes, this next question comes from this lady on your left.
Is there any significance to the number 28?
Oh, good question. Who can answer that one?
does anybody know numerology?
I've wondered about this a lot, but I got no explanations.
I have not seen anything about it, but it's obviously dominant. And again, that whole notion that we got an answer?
Yeah, well, the number 28 is known to mathematicians as a perfect number. It is the sum of all the numbers that evenly divide into it. And there aren't many numbers like
So it is a perfect number, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's a perfect number. It's the sum of all the numbers that evenly divide into it. And there are very few perfect numbers. 6 is one of them, and then 28, and then the next one is in the 400s.
I think throughout the 20s, too, you saw a lot of, excellent, excellent.
This is why you play in university towns.
He gets a thumb.
I mean, in the American response to the Expressionist movement, you did see a lot of, especially plays on Broadway, where you had, playwrights Elmer Rice, Eugene O'Neill, dealing with this sort of expressionist, sort of investigation of character, and also the dehumanization of man. So, The Adding Machine by Elmer Rice, the character's name is Mr. Zero, and they don't even have names, it's just numbers. So it's reducing the human element down to nothing, You're not, it's just like Jean Valjean in Les Mis, right? He's not a name anymore, he's a number. That's what I don't have any math for you. Yeah, he's got the math.
I see one.
Next question comes to you on the floor, straight ahead of you at the back of the house. This gentleman.
Good evening. There was a movie in the 1950s called Trapeze with a very similar theme, and I think it was one of the first Cinerama movies too. Is that right? So was there a relationship between these 2 movies at all?
Yeah, the Burt Lancaster one. I think a relationship is a good. I gotta admit, I should have looked that up. I don't know to what extent it owes more than a few plot devices and a love triangle, but it's not officially, I don't believe, an adaptation of the same novel. Do you know?
The only thing I could say with certainty, I should know that film, is Trapeze, Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis, Gino Lollobrigida. It was a much swarthier film than this one. That's all I know.
But it's another love story about performers. So yes, it's certainly a derivative. Whether it's officially based on the novel, I'm not sure, or it's certainly an adaptation.
On the floor, center, downstage.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the 28 is also the lunar cycle, so perhaps it had something to do because of the thing
time.
about the fact.
So it's time and numbers.
The time, yeah, because it's there's an old adage that says that if you sleep in the light of a full moon, which happens every 28 days, that you will become crazy.
Terrific. See, the best crowd in the world. This is great. We learn a lot. And hopefully people did notice, right, the number of times we get his back. So it starts as his back and 28. He walks down the hall it's almost like he's being floating and stuff like that as well. Were there others that we can't see? Is that problem? Oop. Oh. Otherwise, and it is
Just to your right.
Sorry.
Hi. When you are beginning work on a film and you sit down to watch it, what kind of notes do you make? What kind of questions do you have for yourself? And how many times do you watch it before you start to compose?
I tend to be the one who gets to choose the film, so I will watch it a bunch of times, and then I'll draw up notes for us. And it's essentially a storyboard. So I'll just write down the scenes in order with no indication at all of what I think the music would be. And then we come in together and typically watch it together. There's occasionally a little bit of conversation, but not very much. As much as we're yackers, when we get the drumsticks in our hand or whatever, we tend to go with a very intuitive response to these things. And we find when we tell each other what we think we ought to be doing, usually the other guys sort of resent it and, they shut you down. So we kind of just, launch the film. And we, as Terry mentioned, we do this all very collaboratively, which is really unusual in our business. And one or the other one of us can throw out an idea, rhythmical, melodic, whatever it is, musically, and the other two will just kind of come in with something they think fits with that. And then afterwards, we'll kind of listen to what we've done, and that's sometimes when the discussion happens. We'll say, oh, well, we just wrote a really happy, beautiful scene, but he's being stabbed right now, so, maybe we should try something else. So,
We also found that every time we come in with a preconceived notion, I have this great idea before we start working on it, it never gets into the picture. So it's like, all right, you try that a few times, and it's like, well, forget it, that doesn't work, so I'm not even going to think about it. I try never to hear any of the other musics that have been on these films, so when I do watch them, I watch them completely silent. And early on, we would sit there collectively and we'd start with notepads and start writing notes, and about 5 minutes later, the notepad's on the table, and we're just watching the movie, letting it soak up, soak yourself in it, and then try to wring it out in the studio.
I, contrary, as I almost always am, try to watch these things with whatever soundtrack is with them. The films are meant to have a soundtrack. Without them, they're missing something. They tend to be boring and slow-seeming, even a really great film, because it was always assumed this musical accompaniment was going to fill the audience's attention when there might be not very much happening on screen. So I'll watch whatever soundtrack is included on the DVD, or in a pinch, I'll just put something on my stereo. Now, composers don't like to do that because they don't want to kind of be tainted. They don't want to pick up these, melodies and whatever that somebody else is doing, sort of Stairway to Heaven-like, But given our instrumentation, the chances of our imitating somebody else's, classical score or even piano music are zero. So you can just throw that out the window.
But at this point of your careers, you must realize, there's been years of people asking about this. It's still, I think for the rest of us, it's very hard to understand this sort of collaborative, organic process of what you guys, and I think that's what makes you so special. You don't have one person who writes the music and others perform it. So it's just a stunning kind of process, obviously, and it comes out marvelously along with the movies. So.
It just seems so natural for us. We all have very diverse musical backgrounds, so with each film, it pushes us in directions we wouldn't go if we were just composing music. So it forces you into directions you'd never go. And the hardest part, I think, early on was realizing that it's okay to play something super simple and a basic melody when it's really appropriate to the film. Whereas, the instinct as a musician is to, ta-da, look at me. And we kind of do that enough just with our pile of junk down there, but the whole idea is to really, dig in emotionally to the film.
I will say the only thing worse than or more difficult to access than no music behind a silent film is bad music, and a lot of us, it took years to find, especially and now the generation that's just basically discovering certain films on YouTube and public domain editions where it's like some hack organist only, and it's just not even paying attention to the action or the mood or the implications of the scene. That is worse to me. So the great favor you've done, all of us at Ebertfest in the years we've been coming, is to not have to suffer any of that, and just simply get the best of the film.
In the 26 years that we've been doing this, there is a whole generation of silent film accompanists who have come up. There was very little silent film screenings from 1928 to probably the 70s. And DVDs started to trickle out, very few at that point. But it was at that point that people started thinking again about putting new music in the back of these, because most of these don't have a score or the score is unavailable, but many of them never had a score. And so the quality of the material that we're getting on DVDs now is so much superior to what it was in the 80s and 90s. One of the first ones we watched when we were looking at stuff was The Lost World, which is this great dinosaur movie, you know. And they had taken Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, and that was the background of this dinosaur fight. It's like, I know it was free, and it's a very nice piece of music, but, you know.
It's inappropriate.
And I'd like to thank Giorgio Moroder for doing
The most inappropriate.
possibly the most, a lot of people believe the most inappropriate and the worst soundtrack to one of the greatest movies ever when he redid Metropolis. Because one, it brought Metropolis back into the light, and two, because a lot of people didn't like that score, that's how we began. A programmer in Boston wanted us to score Metropolis because he couldn't stand that music, and he said, hey, why don't you guys come up with a score, we'll play for a weekend. So it's been the 26-year weekend for us.
Well, thank you very much for doing this yet again at Ebertfest. It's certainly the highlight for me at Ebertfest. So thank you very much. Again, thanks to Chaz and Nate for organizing all this, and thank you guys for coming out and sticking around. Have a great festival. Thanks.
And go to see our friend Barry Allen's talk tomorrow. We have to get on an airplane. I am really sorry I'm going to miss it, but somebody go see it for me.
Yes, 9 a.m. in the hotel. And thanks again to the panel.